Have you ever witnessed someone so effortlessly calm that it feels like nothing could shake them? Until it does. Imagine sitting in a restaurant, the soft clatter of dishes around you, the murmur of conversation blending into a familiar background hum, when suddenly the air shifts. One moment, the entertainer everyone knows for his smooth charm is sipping his espresso. The next, a single punch changes everything. What makes a man who seems untouchable, who has spent decades perfecting the art of cool, snap with such precision and force? That question hangs in the air as we watch the unbelievable unfold. It wasn't just anger, it was the quiet, controlled response of someone whose personal boundaries had been crossed in a way that demanded action. How does someone so composed become instantly formidable? And what does that reveal about the person beneath the public persona? The tension is palpable, the kind that makes everyone in the room hold their breath, wondering what will happen next. And when the fist lands, the result is both shocking and inevitable, leaving a silence so heavy it seems to press against the walls. This is the moment that proves that behind sophistication and charm, there is a capacity for decisive action that no one could anticipate, and the story is only just beginning. It was a Tuesday evening in March of 1965, and Las Vegas was humming with its usual mix of glamour and subtle danger, a city where the neon lights promised excitement but whispered secrets to anyone willing to listen. Dean Martin had chosen to spend this particular night at Rao's, an upscale Italian restaurant known for discretion, a sanctuary for those who wanted to exist in public without being consumed by it. He was seated at his usual corner table, a place that gave him both visibility and privacy, finishing a perfectly cooked ossobuco while slowly savoring his second cup of espresso. To the casual observer, he was simply enjoying a quiet dinner, the very picture of effortless sophistication. But those who knew him understood that even in moments of apparent leisure, Dean carried the instincts of a man who had spent decades navigating the unpredictable currents of fame and power. The room smelled of garlic, freshly baked bread, and the faint tang of polished wood, and the low murmur of conversation created an intimate cocoon around each table. Patrons moved with quiet elegance, servers gliding between them, and yet beneath this calm veneer, Dean sensed patterns in behavior, subtle cues that others might overlook. When three men in dark suits were seated at a table across the room, Dean noticed them instantly, their glances skimming over to his corner as if testing the waters. Who were they? Tourists? Businessmen? Something in the way they carried themselves, the measured ease, the sharpness in their eyes, spoke to a different kind of familiarity, a familiarity with intimidation, with control. Dean's fingers traced the rim of his espresso cup, a practiced gesture that disguised his alertness, a quiet readiness. For 20 minutes, the men kept to themselves, speaking in low voices, yet Dean's intuition hummed steadily beneath his calm exterior. He had spent years in Las Vegas understanding how influence moved through a room, and he could read the weight of intentions behind the smoothest words. This dinner, meant to be private, felt suddenly charged, a tension that contrasted sharply with the polite elegance of the establishment. Everyone around Dean was unaware of the storm brewing at his table, a delicate balance between appearance and reality, yet he understood it fully. What was about to happen would test not just his composure, but the very notion of the man behind the legend. Here, in a room designed for serenity and safety, Dean Martin was already bracing for a confrontation that no one else could anticipate, a quiet storm waiting to break. And in that moment, the ordinary rhythms of dinner in Las Vegas were suspended, replaced by a suspense that only he could feel, a tension as sharp as any spotlight, yet hidden beneath the smooth surface of a calm, confident man.
For 20 minutes, Dean Martin tried to focus on the quiet enjoyment of his dinner, but the presence of three men in dark suits across the room had already shifted the air around his table. Who were they? Why had they chosen that restaurant? Something about the way they carried themselves suggested a familiarity with control, a practiced ease in projecting power without speaking a word. Dean, a man who had spent decades navigating both the glitz of Hollywood and the treacherous undercurrents of Las Vegas, could read that kind of energy immediately. He noticed the smallest details, the way the tallest of the trio's shoulders tensed when he scanned the room, the subtle exchange of glances, the almost imperceptible tilt of a head that indicated assessment, calculation, and intent. Was this mere coincidence, or were they here for him? The question pulsed beneath his calm exterior, a silent alarm that only someone with Dean's instincts could hear. Then it began. The largest of the three men, a heavy-set figure with scarred hands and eyes that seemed to calculate every reaction in a glance, stood and moved toward Dean's corner with deliberate purpose. Each step cut through the restaurant's quiet hum like a metronome measuring tension. He spoke first, his voice smooth yet edged with menace, introducing himself as Vincent Torino. Dean, without a flicker of outward emotion, acknowledged him. It was a simple exchange of names, but every word was loaded with the weight of potential consequences. By sliding uninvited into the booth, Vincent asserted control, turning a simple dinner into a high-stakes negotiation without a contract. Dean remained calm, his espresso untouched for a moment, his posture relaxed but alert, a physical translation of mental readiness. Most people would have felt cornered, anxious, perhaps even fearful in the face of a man whose reputation preceded him. Dean, however, had a different rhythm. He measured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in tone, gauging how far the threat would push before action became unavoidable. The two companions moved to flank him, silent shadows amplifying the sense of inevitability, their proximity heightening tension without a single blow being struck. Each observer at the restaurant sensed something had changed, though none could articulate it. Everyone instinctively leaned into the drama unfolding quietly, knowing instinctively that this was no ordinary confrontation. Questions swirled in Dean's mind, a calculus of risk and principle. Should he respond with charm, diffuse the situation as he had so many times before, or should he allow the silent threat to escalate further? The words Vincent used were carefully chosen, a mixture of warning and instruction, designed to undermine not just Dean's professional choices, but his autonomy and relationships. It was the sort of moral pressure that few could resist, the kind that tests identity and resolve in ways the physical threat never could. What would you do if someone tried to dictate whom you could befriend, where you could invest, and how you could live? Dean's choice in that moment would define not just the evening, but the perception of him for years to come. As the seconds stretched, the tension grew palpable. Patrons pretended to focus on their meals, servers moved with deliberate care, and the men's voices remained low, yet the energy in the room had shifted irreversibly. Dean Martin, the effortless entertainer known for charm and laughter, was now the quiet eye in a storm of implied violence. The danger was immediate, invisible to most, and yet completely real. He assessed, he calculated, he waited, holding the room's attention in a way that no one except a master of subtlety could achieve. And in that suspended moment, before the first act of violence erupted, everyone present was asking themselves the same question: what happens next? How does a man who seems so calm respond when the very air around him signals threat? The answers lay not in speculation, but in the clarity of action, which would soon make history and redefine the legend of Dean Martin.
Dean Martin's response came without hesitation, a sudden pivot from the calm, effortless entertainer everyone knew to a force that none could ignore. One moment he was seated, espresso untouched, eyes calculating, measuring, weighing every nuance of threat and intent. The next, his body shifted with precision and purpose. How does a man known for smooth charm translate decades of instinct and controlled power into a single decisive act? The answer was in the punch itself, a right cross delivered with the kind of exacting force that made it impossible to anticipate, yet perfectly inevitable in retrospect. The sound of impact was a shock wave in the room, a sharp punctuation that cut through the hushed murmurs and clinking silverware like a starting gun in slow motion. Vincent Torino, the heavy-set enforcer, had only a moment to register Dean's decision before his body reacted to a physics no one present could deny. Heads turned, breaths caught, and in the next heartbeat, Vincent was airborne, carried backward through space, a human projectile propelled not by rage, but by controlled authority. The collision with the restaurant window was explosive, glass shattering with a sound that seemed to echo into every corner of the establishment. For a brief, suspended moment, there was absolute silence, a frozen tableau of shock and disbelief as patrons, staff, and companions alike processed what had just occurred. How could a man who embodied sophistication and effortless cool produce such sudden, undeniable violence? The two companions froze, their intentions halted mid-motion, confronted by an outcome they had never imagined. Every instinct they possessed told them to retreat, to reassess, yet the spell of Dean's controlled power held them in place, if only for a heartbeat. In the quiet aftermath of that single motion, the room's dynamics had shifted irreversibly. Dean Martin, seated with the same calm demeanor as before, had redefined the limits of expectation. What had begun as a simple dinner now carried the weight of clarity. The man in front of them would not be manipulated, threatened, or coerced. Even as Vincent lay sprawled outside, the impact of the punch extended far beyond the physical. It was a statement, a declaration that subtlety and charm could coexist with the capability of decisive action. There was a paradoxical beauty in it, the kind of controlled, almost artistic violence that only someone with complete mastery over themselves could execute. Could anyone witnessing this remain unmoved, unconvinced of the depth behind Dean's legendary cool? The combination of restraint and sudden action created a sense of catharsis, a tension resolved in a way that shocked the senses, yet felt almost narratively inevitable. Dean's gaze swept over the stunned onlookers, calm, unshaken, almost conversational. The pattern interrupt had been total. The audience had expected charm, perhaps laughter, certainly no confrontation. Instead, they witnessed a man translating his principles and instincts into immediate, undeniable reality. What had been a test of intimidation had become a demonstration of authority, judgment, and the balance of human instinct with moral clarity. In that single punch, history crystallized, not only as a story of unexpected force, but as a lesson in presence, self-possession, and the careful, deliberate assertion of personal boundaries. By the time the restaurant began to stir, voices timidly resuming, the lesson had been absorbed unconsciously by all who were present. Dean Martin had shown, without boasting, that the elegance of calm could be matched with explosive decisiveness, and that sometimes the most direct action is the clearest communication. The punch was not just physical, it was a declaration of identity, a testament to boundaries, and a moment of narrative perfection that would echo in Las Vegas folklore for decades. It left no ambiguity. A man of class could also be a man of undeniable power, and the memory of that single, shocking motion would linger in every mind it touched, a reminder that the unexpected is often the most instructive and unforgettable lesson of all.
For a few heartbeats, the restaurant existed in a strange, suspended silence, as if the sound of normal life had been paused to allow everyone to comprehend what had just occurred. Patrons froze mid-bite, forks hovering inches from their mouths, eyes wide, minds struggling to reconcile the suave entertainer they thought they knew with the sudden explosive force that had just sent a man flying through glass. What had moments ago been background chatter and the clinking of cutlery was replaced by the weight of astonishment, a collective intake of breath that seemed to pull time itself taut. The shattered window glistened in the ambient light, fragments reflecting the room's disbelief, each shard a testament to the gap between expectation and reality, a visual punctuation marking the moment Dean Martin chose action over charm. Vincent Torino's companions, initially rooted to the spot by shock, slowly began to process the enormity of what had just happened. They had come to intimidate, to assert control, to remind a celebrity of the invisible rules that governed Las Vegas. Yet here they were, confronted with a response that defied all assumptions. Every instinct screamed retreat, every calculation of dominance rewritten in real time. Dean's calm gaze, measured and unwavering, contrasted sharply with the chaos of the moment, amplifying the authority he exuded. It was a silent declaration that the man before them could neither be bullied nor underestimated, and in that quiet command, respect was earned without a single word of explanation. Waiters and staff, who had long been trained to anticipate celebrity temperament and maintain discretion, now found themselves participants in an unscripted drama. Their eyes darted from the smashed glass to Dean, then to the stunned mobsters, each mental calculation of risk and reaction informed by decades of observing human behavior. Even without being spoken aloud, an unspoken hierarchy had formed. Dean Martin's authority was immediate, undeniable, and social proof in its purest form. Every glance, every subtle nod among the restaurant's patrons reinforced this perception. In a single motion, the entertainer had transformed into a figure of moral and physical certainty, someone whose boundaries were absolute and whose presence demanded acknowledgement. The silence, however, was not just about fear, it was about recognition of clarity and control. Dean resumed his posture, picking up his untouched espresso as if the prior chaos had been nothing more than a minor interruption. There was a rhythm to his calm that drew the room's attention, an almost meditative signal that the situation was contained, that he had asserted his principles with both precision and grace. Patrons whispered, tentatively at first, then more openly, recounting to one another the audacity of a man who could pivot from smooth entertainer to decisive enforcer in an instant. In that shared acknowledgement, respect solidified not only for Dean's actions, but for his capacity to maintain composure amidst chaos. Even the mobsters, once instruments of intimidation, could not escape the lesson embedded in the aftermath. Retreating with careful, measured steps, their prior assumptions about dominance and control had been shattered. They had witnessed a reality that would linger far longer than the bruises or the broken glass, an experience that recast Dean Martin in a light both human and formidable. What began as a threat had concluded with an unspoken understanding. The consequences of underestimating a person who blends elegance with uncompromising self-respect are profound and enduring. As conversations resumed and life tentatively returned to the restaurant's rhythm, the story of that moment began to take shape in the minds of every witness. Dean's composure, his measured authority, and the awe-inspiring suddenness of his response combined to create an indelible impression. It was a moment that would ripple beyond that evening, a quiet but unmistakable transformation of social dynamics, perception, and respect. In the silence that followed, one truth was clear. Power, when wielded with precision and conscience, commands attention far more effectively than force alone. And Dean Martin had, in a single defining instance, demonstrated exactly how that balance was achieved.